Do you have a favorite animal or bird that you would love to recreate in stitch? Well, this project is for you. Today I'm going to create a beautiful bird ornament using wool felt, fabric, and thread. I'm going to use a template to create the bird in wool. I'm going to add a wing and a different colored head. I'm going to stitch everything together, talk about options. I'm going to add a backing and a hanging loop. This is a beginner-friendly project where I will walk you step by step through the process of creating and stitching this beautiful bird. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. I'll be using some colorful wool blend felt for the body and the head of the bird, and I'm going to be adding some fabric details as well. I'll also be using scissors, 6-stranded embroidery floss, an erasable marker, and embroidery needles. I'm using my large bird template today, and it comes with a wing. So this template is about 6 inches long. And the nice thing about this is you can place the wing in several different positions. So you have lots of options. This large bird template set is available in my shop, and it also comes as a PDF instant download. I'm going to use my heat erasable pen to trace this template, and today I'm going to use felt. So here's the bird that I've traced onto this wool blend felt, and I've cut it out. So I have cut this out just on the outside of the lines that I've marked. So when I place my template back on top, you can see that it's slightly larger than the template. And now what I can do is come back in, if I need to, with a small pair of scissors and trim away any excess to sharpen up the shape of that bird. I particularly notice it here around the head and the beak, so I'm giving it a small trim. And I'm going to trim a little bit off the tail as well. You can just keep playing with this until you get a nice crisp shape. So now I want to create a different colored head for my bird. The inspiration for this bird today is the painted bunting. It's an incredibly colorful bird. It has a blue head, and it also has orange, red, and green on it. So I'm taking my cue from this bird, and I want to cut out some blue. And I'm going to use felt for that as well. So I've used my template to trace just the head and part of the neck section of the bird. I'm creating a sort of rounded shape on the bottom. And I've done that extra trimming as well to get it the shape that I want it to be. So now I want to stitch this blue piece onto the orange piece. And that's going to add some extra thickness. So after it's stitched on, I'm going to remove the orange that's behind it. So now I'm thinking about my wing shape and the options that I have to create the wing. So I have 2 other pieces of this wool blend felt, a pale green and a bright green. And I think either of these would be really nice to use as a wing. The other option is to use fabric. So I've pulled out this piece of batik that has red and green in it. And I can see on this piece of fabric that there is a leaf shape that's very similar in size to my wing template. So I could trace this template onto the fabric and cut out a wing, and that is a great option. But because this leaf shape seems to fit so perfectly, I'm just going to freehand cut it out of the fabric, and I'm going to place it on my bird and see what I think of it. So here's my wing shape. I'm really liking the way that that looks up against those 2 brightly colored pieces of felt. So now I'm just going to move it around and get it in exactly the spot that I want it. And I'm liking the way that looks, and so I'm going to use this instead of using my green felt for the wing. Either option would be really nice here. And I've tucked that fabric underneath that blue piece of felt for the head. So now I'm ready to stitch it on. I'm going to choose some colored floss that matches the head of the bird. So I've chosen a couple shades of blue, and I've also pulled out an orangey red that's going to go really well with the wing. And I've also chosen a green that matches the color of the fabric as well. And I decided to pull out a 3rd color of blue just so I have some tonal differences for stitching the head of the bird. So now I'm ready to attach the bird's head. I've threaded 2 strands of the 6-stranded floss onto my needle, right where the fabric and the felts are meeting. I'm paying attention to the way that the feathers on the bird would go and trying to direct my stitches to match the feather direction. And I'm just going to move across, stitching on that whole bottom part of the head of my bird. So now that the head is stitched on, you can see that I have the orange part behind my blue head. So I could leave this orange piece here and stitch everything together, but I can also remove it. And then the head and the body will have the same thickness. Either way is fine, but I've decided I'm going to remove that orange part that I don't need. So I'm coming in with my small scissors and I'm trimming fairly close to that line of stitching that I've done. And now I've got this orange head, and I can probably use that in another project. So I'll put that aside. So I can continue stitching, and that's going to secure the orange and the blue piece together even further. So now that the head is secured to the body, I'm going to turn to the body, and I have this piece of red and gold silk. I'm testing out if I would like to place this over top of the orange part to create some texture and color for the body. So I'm going to bring out my bird and place it on top of the silk and see what portion that I want of that fabric, and then I'm going to bring in my template and I'm going to use that to trace and cut out a piece of silk. Because the silk is so thin and it unravels fairly easily, I've cut out a piece that's larger all the way around. And then I have the option of folding those edges under. So I've slipped it underneath the piece of fabric that I'm using for the wing, and I'm liking that color combination. So I've chosen a coordinating color of floss, a sort of orangey red color, and I'm going to begin stitching on that piece of silk. I have 2 strands of floss again, and I'm starting my stitching just below the wing. So I'm not stitching on the wing, I'm stitching beside it. And I'm going to do a line of stitching all the way along, following that line of the wing to stitch on that piece of silk. So now I've stitched that all the way around the edge of the bird. So the option now is to come in and trim all those edges of fabric, or to leave them there so that I have the option of folding under when I'm stitching. I think I'm going to choose that option now. I think that's going to work really well. Because the silk is so thin, it's going to unravel. Folding it under is going to give me a nice clean look here. So because around the belly of the bird there's a curve, I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm stitching, and when I'm ready to fold under those edges, I'm going to clip to create some shaping. So I'm going to do one more round of stitching, bringing my stitching close to the edge of my wool felt, and then I'm going to be ready to fold under those edges. So now I'm going to bring in my small scissors, and I'm going to place some small clips going straight in towards that body, making sure that I don't go too far. And that's going to allow me to fold under and keep that curved shape without too much puckering of that silk fabric. So now I can fold under the edges and hold them down with my left hand and add some stitching with my right hand to secure down all those edges. So here's what it looks like on the back with all of those edges folded under. And I have that nice curved shape for the belly of the bird. And I haven't done any stitching yet on the wing. So the thread that I've used to stitch on that red is a fairly good match. So it's adding texture, but no contrasting colors at this point. Just a simple running stitch following the shape of the body. Now, depending on the fabric you're using here, underneath the wing, you could cut away and remove the fabric, the red fabric, if it was thick and it was going to be too many thicknesses to stitch through. That's not a problem here because this silk is so thin that I'm just going to leave it here. The one part that needs some extra stitching is on the tail, and I've decided to add some blanket stitching in that one spot. I think it's a nice looking stitch to give the impression of tail feathers, and it works really well to hold down fabrics that you've tucked towards the back. So just that little bit of blanket stitching there. And then I'm going to return to the running stitch to secure down the fabric along that top part of the tail. I'm going to show something optional here that can create some really nice effects if you have fabric over top of a colorful felt and you want some of that colorful felt to show through. You can come in and do a technique where you slash your fabric and you're deliberately opening up, creating a small viewpoint into what's underneath. So I'm coming in with my small scissors again, and in between the stitch lines that I've created, I'm cutting. So I'm opening up that fabric so that that orange underneath can be shown. Now this is such a small area that this is going to be a very subtle effect here. But depending on your project, this can be a really nice effect where you can get lots of color variation and some beautiful texture. So now I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to rub it right along the area that I've slashed. And that's going to open up the fabric and show some of that orange underneath. And then after that, you can come in and you can add any more stitching that you want. So some orange is showing through here. It's just a very nice subtle effect. So now I'm going to continue and add more stitching to this red area. And that's going to give lots of really nice feather effects. Now I'm going to come in with my green floss, still using 2 strands, and I'm going to add some stitching to the green areas of this wing. This is going to secure down this fabric and start to add some beautiful texture onto this wing. So here's what it looks like so far with these first few stitches. And now I have a decision to make about the red areas on this fabric. I could stitch in red over top of them, or I could stitch in green over top of the red. And that's going to add some interest and contrast into the wing area. I had the opportunity to take my stitching outdoors, and I finished the stitching on the wing while I was there. I also stitched the eye using black, white, and some of the orange red from the body. I'll be adding a tutorial about stitching the eye for members of this channel. If you want to know more about becoming a member, there's a link in the description that will take you to all the info. When you take a look at the head in comparison to the body, you may feel like there's a thickness discrepancy. And that's the case here because of the fabric and the stitching that's been added to the body. Now, if I had left the orange bird head on, the part that I removed, this may not be the case. So I could have just trimmed that orange head area down and left it there. But not to worry, if you decide later that you want more thickness on the back, you can add a piece of fabric or felt. I think of it as adding padding. So I traced the head area on this piece of felt and then I trimmed it down so it was smaller. So I can place it behind the head and I can attach it with stitching while I'm adding stitching to the bird's head. So now I'm going to add feather marks on the head. And I'm not going to stitch everywhere. I'm just going to strategically place stitches around the neck and the eye and the cheek. So here it is, just a bit of stitching, adding some texture on the head, and it's adding some interesting shape all around the head. Now I'm turning to the beak, and I've decided to add fabric in gray. And this is inspired by the painted bunting and its pale gray beak. So this is a piece of cotton, and I trimmed it to fit inside the beak shape. And I'm going to stitch it on using a matching color of floss. Here's the beak stitched on, and if I flip it over, you can see that small piece of felt that I added to the head, and that's adding a bit of thickness. So at this point, the stitching on the bird is complete, and it's a good time to talk about the options for what this stitched bird can be used for. One option is to add it to a larger stitched piece. Here's a green background that I've been slow stitching on. And something in a solid color like this would be ideal for this bird because it's so colorful and it can really shine on a background like this. And it could also be stitched onto something else, a bag or a jean jacket, and you can use it like a beautiful patch or an applique. Now, if you're interested in making a custom patch for a jean jacket, I'm going to add a link to a playlist where I add in stages a full panel to the back of my jean jacket. Another option is to make a hanging ornament out of this stitched bird. And in that case, that would mean that this piece needs a backing. So I've chosen a piece of batik fabric to use for the backing. And one of the reasons I chose batik is because it doesn't fray very easily, so I don't need to fold the edges under. I can just place my template on the fabric, trace it, and cut it out. Now for batik, both sides are the good side. But if you're using a fabric with a right and a wrong side, make sure you flip your template over so that you have the right side facing up when you're stitching on that back. So to attach this, I'm going to use thread basting just to hold it in place so it doesn't shift too much. I'm using regular sewing thread. I tie a knot in the end, and I'm going to take big stitches. I'm going to stay towards the middle so I leave the edges free for stitching it on, and I'm going to move my way all the way around until I get back to where I started. I've chosen the orange-red thread, and I'm going to attach this using the running stitch. So I'm going to start up here, right where the back meets the neck, and I'm going to move around the head, and I'm going to go all the way around and come near to where I started, leaving a small space. And now I'm going to remove my basting stitches. And to do that, I use the back of my needle, and I start pulling out those large stitches. So I still have that small opening where I haven't completed the stitching, and that's going to be the place where I'm going to add a loop so that I can hang this bird. So there's lots of options about what you can use. I've got a piece of ribbon here, and that would work really well. I've got a piece of twisted rope and some rat tail cording. Any of these would work really well. So I've chosen this brown piece of rat tail cording, and I've cut a piece that's long enough that I can fold it over to create a loop. It's probably about 7 inches long. So I'm going to take the two ends, I'm going to tuck it in that space where I haven't stitched. I'm going to take a look at it, make sure that it's the length I want. Now I'm going to take one more stitch to get closer to where I want those to be. I'm going to slip them under, and I'm going to stitch back and forth across that cording to make sure that it's attached. So I'm going to go across and then turn and go back once again in the other direction. And I can give it a little tug just to make sure that I feel like it's secure. And then I can knot my thread. So there it is. Here's what it looks like on the back with that beautiful batik fabric. And here it is from the front. And now I can hang this somewhere. This would be beautiful on a Christmas tree. Really, you could hang it anywhere. It's so bright and cheerful. It would be nice in a window. You could hang it in your kitchen. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I hope I've given you some ideas and inspiration for creating your own bird. You can take inspiration from a favorite bird, or you can even make up your own bird with its own colors. Anything goes here. The only limit is your imagination. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, happy stitching.